All right, so it looks like we have a smaller group today, which is just fine. That's great. But I have some things I could talk about, but I thought maybe before I do that, first of all, Mario and Pam, is it okay if I just launch in?
Absolutely.
Okay. I thought maybe I would see if any of you who have called in have any specific areas or questions. You know, we could talk about a lot of things, anything with finance, nonprofit finance, governance, how you're thinking about programs, but happy to talk about the things I came prepared to talk about, but if there's any specific questions, just kind of raise your hand and we can go through those, because this is really your time. It's not about me just talking.
And once again, I'll ask Alicia, I know Kelly's able to keep her eye on the chat function, but Alicia, if you could too, just so that any questions can get conveyed to everybody, it'd be great.
I saw Michelle's hand go up.
Yeah, I just had a kind of a theoretical question. Has anybody that you know received an EIDL loan?
Not anyone that I know personally, but I know through a national nonprofit Facebook group that's a closed group that I'm a part of. I see a lot of people in there getting their EIDL advance. We haven't gotten ours at Rumble as of yesterday. I haven't checked today. It does seem like there's a new spate of activity as of today that I noticed in that chat, that Facebook group, where a lot of people are reporting they got it in the last 24 hours, but I haven't checked ours today. And I haven't received any additional information from the SBA since we applied, and we applied the first day it opened for the EIDL.
So you just apply on that website and then it goes to Neverland, right? And
yeah, evidently. Yep.
Okay.
And
okay.
that program did run out of funding. Okay, so let me back up.
Right.
So everyone knows we're talking about the EIDL, the Economic Impact Disaster Loan Program, not the PPP program. So the EIDL is the one where you apply directly with the SBA. And under the CARES Act, there was funding for an automatic $10,000 advance that did not have to be repaid if you applied for that. Well, there was such a demand that the appropriation for that ran out immediately, like within days. The SBA didn't really publicize that, but we learned after the fact that that's what happened. The bill that was passed last week by Congress that refunded the PPP program also had a new appropriation for the EIDL program. And what I've read is that those are being processed on a first in, first out basis, but I don't know if that's accurate because we applied right away. But
Kelly, this is Noel.
This is Jenny Birnie. The Center for the Arts received the $10,000 last week.
Okay, there you go.
Ooh, awesome.
And the Land Trust received $5,000 on the 21st.
Well done. Congratulations to both of y'all. So thanks for weighing in. And everyone knows originally it was $10,000 per application. And then based on the demand, they realized that was kind of out of control. And they put in a new rule later that it was going to be that $10,000 advance would be based on the number of employees. And if you recall, when you submitted that application, you put your number of employees, and that's where they're pulling that from. And it's limited to $1,000 per employee up to a max of $10,000. So Noel, is that why you had 5,000, do you think?
Yep, we have 5 employees, yep.
Mm-hmm.
And the center had 45 employees at the time.
Yep, okay.
And so did you get any correspondence between the time you submitted the application and then when you got it? You just have no idea what your status is.
Is that right, Noel and Jenny?
Yeah, I saw nothing come through until it hit our bank account.
Same with me, same deal.
And that's consistent with what I'm seeing on those threads that I follow, as people are just like, oh, it just showed up. So Stan, did you have a question?
I did, Kelly. How is that affected if all the employees are 1099s as far as that $1,000 per employee?
So, so technically the 1099s are not considered employees under federal Labor Department and IRS rules. However, the SBA may or may not know that. So they're gonna, my understanding is that they're gonna look at your application that you submitted for the EIDL, and whatever number you put on there is a number, they're just gonna assume those were classified as employees. How that shakes out later, if they weren't technically employees, I don't know, but I could look into that and see if there's any guidance that I could forward to you. So what I would say is I would be careful if you don't have W-2 employees, if you have 1099 contractors that you reported in that box for employees on the EIDL loan. I would be careful about, I don't know how it would shake out later, but I would be careful about sort of banking on that money. But I will look for some guidance and see what I can find for you and send it to you separately.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we start with other topics?
I've heard
Okay.
some conflicting information about if you got PPP, you can't apply for EIDL. Is that true?
No, that's
Some
not
people
true.
I've heard have, and some people have said you can't.
Okay, so here's where the confusion comes in. You can apply for both. But if you have applied for and received an EIDL loan, including the advance, those loan proceeds for the EIDL are not eligible. You have to haircut your loan forgiveness on the PPP program. Does that make sense? So I can help someone with the math on that because we might have to look at your situation, but it's not that they're exclusive of one another. But if you've received an EIDL loan, and I don't know anyone yet who's actually received the full loan. I only know of organizations receiving the advance, and I know the advance will reduce your loan forgiveness, but my understanding is that a loan would also reduce the amount of loan forgiveness that you're eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. But if you wanted to talk separately about your specific situation or someone else's, I could talk about that separately too.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So before I get started, maybe we could do a little survey, just a show of hands. And does everyone know that down on the, isn't there like a little show your hand? Oh, the reactions down at the bottom of the screen. So you don't actually have to, if you don't want us to see your, unmade bed or whatever, you don't have to show your video. You can use the reaction button. But how many people have actually applied for and received the PPP loan? There's 1, 2. Okay.
3.
And then 3. Okay. So 3. Okay. And then how many people have applied but they haven't heard about it? They don't know if they've gotten it. Michelle, Ben, Stan, Lauren. Okay, quite a few. All right, so that helps me because that'll help me know what to talk about. So let me just start off with where the status of where the second round of funding is. I just looked a while ago, and the SBA said in 24 hours, they've processed $50 billion in the first 24 hours of the opening of the second round. Interestingly, I'm curious to see how this plays out in the next few days. The SBA realized that some of the larger banks had developed robotic systems for inputting applications. And that's what was bogging down the system yesterday. So it was overwhelming the SBA's website. And if you heard in the news, it was crashing yesterday. And so sometime this afternoon, the SBA forbade those banks from continuing to use those robotic systems to try to give the mid-size and smaller banks and smaller organizations a fairer shake. So that $50 billion may be inflated because of the robotic entry. But nonetheless, the expectation is that those funds will probably be subscribed to by the end of this week. So I think that's probably still a good estimate. So what I thought I would talk about is really 2 things. One is if you haven't gotten the PPP loan and you don't think you are going to get it, what other programs are out there for you? Because there are some, and they're not terrible. They're still good benefits, and one of them is not getting any attention. So I thought I would talk about that a little bit. And then the second thing I thought I would talk about is some strategies around whether you should try to maximize loan forgiveness, or whether you might actually want to be in a position to carry a loan under the PPP program at that 1%. So I thought I'd talk about those two things. If those sound valuable to you all, sort of nod your heads or raise your hand, and I'll keep going. Okay. All right. So first, let's talk about what the two programs that I think you should really be paying attention to if you're not going to be able to get the PPP loan. And the first is called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. So are people familiar with that? Okay. Yeah, it's not getting much attention. I don't know why, because it's actually pretty good. So to the extent you have employees, now this is critical. When I say employees, I'm talking W-2 employees, okay? So these are people that you issue W-2s to at the end of the year, not independent contractors. These are the people that you as an employer pay payroll taxes to. So the federal government has come out and said, if you have employees and you pay them at any point between March 13th of this year and December 31st of this year, okay, so any time, and they're not looking at reduction in headcount, there's no requirements that you keep people on payroll, just anyone that you pay from March 13th to December 31st. If you were operating in a jurisdiction where your business was fully or partially suspended by a public health order, which if you're in Gunnison County, that applies to all of us on this call. The first quarter that happens, the first calendar quarter that happens, you are eligible for a refundable payroll tax credit of 50 cents for every dollar of wages you pay to an employee, up to a maximum credit of $5,000 per employee. So let me explain how that works. First of all, this is not eligible if you got the PPP loan. They are mutually exclusive. So this is only available to employers who did not get the PPP loan. What this means is, let's take this quarter that we're in right now, the second quarter. Every employee that you're paying those wages to, those qualified wages, 50 cents of every dollar will be given back to you by the federal government as a refundable payroll tax credit. And this is where I'm seeing a lot of confusion. People think that it's limited to the amount of payroll taxes you would have owed. That's not the way a refundable credit works. So let's say you pay someone $100 this quarter. Let's just keep it simple, okay? And you didn't get the PPP loan, and you are in a jurisdiction that where you are partially or fully suspended from operating because of a public health order, then you're going to get a $50 credit when you file your 941 at the end of the quarter. Let's say the taxes that you report on that 941, there you go. Let's say the taxes that you report on that 941 are only $10. You're going to get $50 back, not just the $10 that you would have owed. So a lot of people have blown past this program because they think, well, I don't pay that much in payroll taxes, so that credit isn't very valuable. The credit is not limited to the amount of employer payroll taxes that you owe for that quarter. There are two ways this will be refunded to you. So this gets a little complicated how it works in practice. The easiest way will be, they're working on a new 941 right now. You will file that 941, or your accountant will, at the end of the quarter. So that would be sometime in July if you're a calendar year taxpayer. Well, it's in July for all of us. And when you file that 941, it'll report the amount, it'll calculate and report the amount of this refundable credit. And when that gets filed, the Treasury will process it, and they'll either electronically deposit back into your account or send you a check for that refundable amount. So what I'm seeing and being told is that you can expect that refund within weeks of filing your 941. If you are strapped for cash, there is a process for requesting in advance of your estimated refundable credit for the quarter. If any of that applies to any of you, get in touch with me. It's a new form the IRS just published. I think it's form 7200, but that's going to be a more complicated situation. So there is a way to get cash sooner. You estimate how much you think the amount of the refundable credit would be, and the Treasury just takes your word for it and refunds it, and you settle up with them and prove it out later, right? So that $5,000 credit is per employee for the rest of the year. So it's not just for this quarter. It's every quarter that you are partially or fully suspended from operating, or in which your revenues are 50% less than they were the same quarter in 2019. So this could play out in a number of ways for several of you, right? So let's say the county opens by the third quarter, but visitorship is down or your revenues are down. You may not be able to apply for this credit based on the public health order, but you could be eligible for the credit based on your revenues in this quarter, that third quarter, compared to the third quarter of the previous year. What I haven't been able to track down, and I'm very curious about, and Pam, I don't know if you've seen any guidance anywhere, or Mario, but for nonprofits, what are they going to define as revenues? Because a lot of us go into the third and fourth quarter where a lot of our philanthropy comes in. So I'm trying to track down whether contributions qualify as revenue for this calculation, because I think a lot of nonprofits, you know, hopefully none of us are seeing a full 50% drop in philanthropy, but when you look on balance between your operational and your philanthropic revenues, I could see how some people might have that 50% drop in the fourth quarter of 2020 compared to 2019. So Pam, have you seen anything, or, okay. I think I think people are focusing on it yet or thinking about it because we've all been focused on the PPP, but if I see any guidance, I'll share it with the group. But I'll pause there because it's a complicated how that refundable credit program works, but I'll see if there's any questions.
Kelly, I'll ask, is it by quarter then? So, I mean, I take it the first quarter is not going to be in that, even though March 13th fell in the first quarter, correct? So we're talking about the second quarter, correct?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay, and then so if we're moving from the second quarter forward, it's for each quarter. So theoretically, we would get this for each quarter, or you only can apply for it for one quarter?
You can apply for it for every quarter, but it's a $5,000 per credit per employee limit for the whole year. So you could have, you know, if you use that $5,000 per employee in the first quarter that you apply this credit, you can't use it for that employee in subsequent quarters. But let's say in this quarter it's $1,000 per employee, then you still have $4,000 in subsequent quarters to apply.
So just simple math, if I had 10 employees, the max we could get would be $5,000 for the year.
Per employee. So yeah, exactly.
Okay. Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you.
So it's actually quite generous. I mean, like when I was thinking we weren't going to get the PPP at Rumble, I realized that, you know, if we have 17 year-round employees, then, you know, we could potentially be looking at 17 employees times $5,000 per employee by the end of the year with that credit. And so it was a very material number for us. You know, it's not as good as the PPP, obviously, but it's better than nothing, and it could be very valuable.
So Kelly, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few organizations like ours that did not get suspended because we kept working from home. So we have not suspended operations. Does that kick us out of applying for this?
No. So because the way the legislation is written, it doesn't matter if you were able to keep going. It's whether there was a health order in your area that that basically sent you home. So there's no, I've looked into that, and there's no requirement that you actually not work. It's just that there's a health order in place in your area. And so you can see on the surface that may not make sense, but when you start to think about it, you realize the government with these programs is just trying to push money out into the economy. And so you can understand, you can see how it would be difficult to start to enforce, well, maybe you had a public health order, but you were able to continue operating. So that they just took a blanket approach, which is if you have those public health orders, or you saw a 50% decline in revenues compared to the same quarter the previous year, then you're eligible for this credit.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
But like you said, you're not sure the difference between earned revenue and contributed revenue, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny, even with the PPP. So are there any organizations here who are who receive federal funds? You have a federal contract to deliver services? No? Okay. Pam and Mario and Alicia, if you hear of any other nonprofits in the Valley who are direct recipients of federal funds, so then sometimes that's like social service organizations, food banks, things like that. I'm working with a consultant up in the Northeast who is really tied in with the OMB guidance in that whole world. And there's some complicating things that are happening with the PPP and recipients of direct federal monies. Rumble is one of them. So we're paying him to help us work through those issues. But I'm happy to share that information if you hear of anyone, because it's actually a double dip if you're getting reimbursed for salaries and you get the PPP for those salaries. So we're working through the mechanics of that. All right. Okay.
I want to take up all the time. I got one more question though.
Yeah, go for it.
Obviously, we're mandated to be closed, and preschools are reopening here shortly. So this quarter we can say, because of county ordinance, we can claim it for this quarter. But then next quarter, because we're open, we have to see a 50% reduction.
Yep.
So it's one or the other. So because the county is going to allow us to be open for the next quarter, then we have to show that we're 50%.
Yeah, it's an or test, as we say in the tax world, not an and test. So it's an or test.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, do you know, when you talk about direct federal funding, are you also referring to block grants?
Potentially. It depends on how they're structured and where you fall sort of in the pecking order of that money being trickled down. So, but if you have a contract that has a federal agency name on it, right? So like Department of Health and Human Services, or I don't forget where the Main Street grants come out of. I forget which agency. But if you have a contract directly, so the government is basically paying you as a nonprofit to deliver services, that would be the context that you would see it in. But I could help you try to figure out whether it applies to you.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about it because those monies are gone, they're spent. So
oh yeah, then you don't have a problem. Right. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on the refundable payroll tax credit? So again, it's called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. Your payroll processor or your bookkeeper or payroll clerk or accountant should be able to help you calculate that. And I haven't seen the new 941, so I don't think it's out yet. But I'll keep an eye out, and as soon as it comes out, I'll try to share it with the group too, because I'm curious. I'm curious for another organization that that didn't get the PPP, how that works. So, okay. Then the other programs I said I'd talk about too is one that that I mentioned in the last call, but I wanted to remind everyone of, and that is the paid leave under the Families First Act. So that was the first package passed by Congress after the start of the pandemic. And to remind everyone, that is a provision where you, to the extent you have employees who are not able to work, so again, they're on payroll, but they're not able to work because they're either sick with coronavirus, seeking treatment, or testing for coronavirus, or caring for children who are at home because their schools are closed, that there's paid leave that as long as you keep them on payroll, the government will reimburse you, again, via payroll taxes, a refundable payroll tax mechanism for the leave that you pay to those employees. There's a lot of really good information out there about how that Families First program works. And as I said last week, the important thing for all of you is that you're having your employees, even salaried employees, keep good, detailed records of their time so that you can substantiate any time that they weren't able to work during their normally scheduled workday because they were either sick, caring for someone in their family who was sick, seeking treatment or testing, or caring for children who are home out of school or out of daycare. And I know, I'm sure most of us have employees who haven't been able to work their full schedules because of homeschooling and working with their kids or taking care of things. So I'm having our staff at Rumble track that really carefully. And for some of our employees, it's kind of building up. Now, that's not necessarily going to be a dollar for dollar credit because there's a limit on the daily rate that the government will let you sort of claim reimbursement for. The general rule, I did the math, and if you have employees who are making like $50,000 to $55,000 or less, you're going to get more or less a full reimbursement for that time that they were spending taking care of their families or themselves. There are limits. There's sick leave component, I think, has a 2-week limit, and then there's it's a long length of time. It might be like 12 weeks in terms of caring for kids who are at home out of school. But again, I've got a couple of worksheets that are really good that explain the mechanics of that. So maybe Mario and Pam and Alicia, maybe after this, I can kind of group all the things I've talked about together and we could send them out as a resource to people. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay. And then I can, answer individual questions about how the mechanics work on those if people want that.
Great.
But just to review, the employee retention tax credit, the first one I talked about, is you cannot do that at all if you get the PPP, right? They are completely mutually exclusive. The Families First paid leave you can do if you get the PPP, but any dollar of wages that are reimbursed under the Families First Act are not eligible for loan forgiveness under the payroll protection program. So you can't double dip. So you have to have really clean payroll records to keep all that separate. Are there any questions on those two programs?
Yeah, Kelly, is there an urgency to apply for the first one, the retention tax credit?
Nope, there's no need because you won't have to count. The only urgency would be if you really were strapped for cash and you wanted to apply for that advance credit, that Form 7200 that I talked about. But otherwise, you can wait until the end of the quarter when you file your 941. And I'm guessing the reason you're asking is because you don't know if you've got the PPP yet.
Right.
And so, yeah, so my advice would be to wait and see if you get the PPP. And then if you don't, you can turn toward calculating what the benefit and the impact would be of the employee retention tax credit.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, so the next topic that I thought might be interesting or helpful to some of you is with the PPP. So for those of you who have gotten it or think you might get it, there are some strategies to think about whether you should apply for loan forgiveness or whether you might want it to be a loan. The obvious thing is to get loan forgiveness because that functions as effectively income, right? Because loan forgiveness means you don't have to repay it. So think of it almost like a grant. I would argue, and this may be a limited circumstance, but I wanted to point it out because it may not be obvious. I would argue that there are certain circumstances where it may be more advantageous for your nonprofit to forego some of the loan forgiveness and think about keeping the loan portion of the PPP loan. So let me explain the circumstance I'm talking about. If you have already laid off employees, or if you don't have work for people, you may think about not bringing them back to work even if you get the PPP loan, or potentially laying them off and letting them claim unemployment. And by the way, I'm not advocating one or the other. I'm just giving you the information. So I don't want any of you going around telling everyone I'm telling everyone to lay off nonprofit staff, because that's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to be strategic here. If you don't have work for them, you may want to preserve the source of capital that the PPP loan represents for when you do have work for people and when your programs are back up and running. Because never, ever, ever again in the history of your nonprofit will you get capital at 1%. Now, you need to be real clear that you have the wherewithal to pay that back and that you have a very clear plan for operating and that your board is completely on board with what you're thinking about doing if you're going down this road. But the discussions I'm seeing and that I'm paying attention to are where nonprofits have laid people off. They're not able to operate yet because they're not open or they can't host their programs. And now they're debating, you know, do we bring employees back for just 8 weeks to maximize the loan forgiveness? Because that's what you have to do to get the loan forgiveness, right? You've got to bring those people back on payroll if they're not on payroll. And you have to spend 75% of your loan proceeds on that payroll in that 8-week period to get the loan forgiveness. So there may be a situation because of the way the timing is working out with this and the way our summer works and the way our seasonality works, it may be more advantageous for some of you, if you have laid people off or you're thinking about it, to go ahead and do that even if you get the PPP loan and then save the capital of the PPP loan for when you are able to operate. But again, you need to have a real clear plan for what your cash flow is going to look like, what your revenue projections are going to look like, and you need to feel really confident that you're going to be able to pay that back because you do not want to dig a deeper hole for your nonprofit. And you don't just want to kick the can down the road and wait for your nonprofit to collapse. So I would only advise that you do that if your accountant is on board, if your treasurer is on board, your full board understands the risks. But I wanted to put that out there because I'm seeing on a lot of the forums that I follow that there's just a scramble to bring a lot of employees back on payroll who weren't on payroll. And for some nonprofits, that may not be the wisest thing. So, so it's probably a controversial topic, but I thought I'd throw it out there and see if there's any questions from anyone.
I have a somewhat related question. This is Nicole with the School of Dance.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that brings to mind, and I don't have all the details on this, but if we were to get the PPP funds, we haven't heard yet, I'm still hopeful. What's the exact time frame, or how do we calculate the time frame from which those funds had to be spent, and how long is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think what you're asking is to qualify, to maximize the amount that you qualify for loan forgiveness. How does that work, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so there's an 8-week window. And if you spend, and to the extent that you use the PPP proceeds on payroll, qualified payroll expenses during that 8-week window, or utilities, or mortgage interest during that 8-week window, then those proceeds are eligible for loan forgiveness, assuming that at least 75% of those proceeds were spent on payroll, and you did not have a significant reduction in your workforce, right? And that 8-week window starts the day the money hits your bank account. So I've seen some organizations where maybe you sign the loan paperwork, but then the money does, you know, so you sign off on the loan, you accept it, but then it may not hit your bank account for a day or two. That 8-week window starts on the day it's deposited into your bank account. So does that answer your question, Nicole?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm seeing some confusion about since last week is, and Shelley, if Shelley's on the call, we were talking about this today. Because of all the controversy surrounding the publicly traded companies who had all their subsidiaries apply and get the loan proceeds, in response to that, the SBA issued a 31st question to its Q&A that it's on its website to address, to sort of close that loophole. And what they said in that 31st question is, do you remember when you submitted the PPP loan and it asked you to certify that you were facing economic uncertainty and that's why you needed the loan? The SBA issued guidance that said, if you're a publicly traded company, you've got access to capital markets, and therefore it's impossible for you to say that you were facing economic uncertainty. That's generally what they said. So public traded companies, give us the money back by May 7th, and we won't penalize you. It's, in addition to that, they said anyone who took PPP loan proceeds and is going to apply for loan forgiveness is going to be asked to, could be asked when they apply for the loan forgiveness to explain why they thought they were facing economic uncertainty. In other words, to kind of justify that. And so, so Shelley called me today and asked how we were handling it at Rumble. And so we're doing a couple of things. I think that my interpretation is that the SBA and your bank are going to look at what you knew at the time that you accepted the loan, not what we know in July when you're applying for loan forgiveness. So I think that's important for people to understand. They're not expecting you to have a crystal ball and to look forward and to say, you know, because it may turn out that some of us are really fine by the time July comes around. I mean, I don't think that'll be our case in Rumble. I think we are going to experience a significant decline in revenue in June, but some organizations may not, right? And they're not going to look at whether you did experience a significant decline in revenue. My understanding is what they're going to look at is, what did you know at the time you accepted the loan? And so therefore, I think documenting what you knew, what the future looked like to you at that point in time, is important. So I did a couple of things at Rumble to do that. One, when I had the board sign a resolution or vote on a resolution approving the PPP loan, I put language in that resolution that described the economic uncertainty we were facing and sort of described the conditions precedent, if you will, so that it wasn't just me as a finance person or Ian as the executive director saying, yeah, it's going to be terrible, we got to have this. I wanted the governance structure, I wanted the governing body of the organization to also have ownership for that decision, that yes, we believe we're facing economic uncertainty. The second thing I did is I wrote a financial report with the treasurer and with Ian that we delivered to the full board and had them accept, sort of, and ask a lot of questions of and really grill us on, that described what we think the outlook is for the year and why we think you know, certain things are going to happen and what the financial impact would be. And included in that was an analysis of our reserves, a line of credit that we have access to. So in other words, all the funding sources that we could tap, and why we thought the PPP was the key to getting us through the summer. So we sort of built an argument in that financial report that explained how critical the PPP was and why our line of credit, for example, which has a very high rate of interest, was not a sustainable long-term source of funding for us. How we can only tolerate, you know, dipping into our reserves so much, or we wouldn't have the operating capital we needed. So I built an argument in that financial memo. And then the third thing I'm doing, and I haven't finished it this week, is I'm just putting together a one-page memo that documents the timeline. You know, on this date, this public health order went out. On this date, this public health order went out. And I'm ending it with April 24th, the county published a timeline. I don't know if all of you have seen that infographic that says phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of when things might reopen, and sort of points out that there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And I'm referencing that and saying, at this point, when we accepted the loan on April 24th, we still don't know when we're going to be able to open to researchers and students in Gothic. And so I'm just documenting that now while it's fresh on my mind, so that when I go to apply for loan forgiveness, I can just hand that over to the bank and the SBA. So if, to the extent that you've already received the PPP loan, or you're thinking about, you know, you think you'll get it this week, I would take some time and just document that, so that so that you're not trying to reconstruct the facts and remember what happened when you're applying for that loan forgiveness. You know, it'll be half an hour or an hour really well spent. So that's something that's new since the last time we talked. Any other questions? Any general finance or strategy or governance questions? I'm happy to answer any. Okay.
I'll throw one out just randomly to the group, just as far as people that have received PPP. Was it from Bank of the West? Has anybody got approved for PPP through Bank of the West? That we know locally.
West Elk Soccer did. I was
Good for
talking to
them.
Kristen yesterday.
But I'm still learning.
Suddenly my phone started talking to me. I'm sorry. So yes, West Elk Soccer got one through Bank of the West the other day.
I'm with Bank of the West. This is School of Dance, and we have not received, but I did get a call from a local here, banker, and they've distributed questions and support to local banks from some place in the headquarter office. And I don't know if that has happened for you guys, but we had a local actually reach out to us and help us finalize a few pieces. So after hearing absolutely nothing since I submitted, that was a sign of hope for us.
Noel, where did you get yours from?
Crested Butte Bank. Yep. And so I submitted that on the Friday morning when the loan application process opened up, and just dumped everything I could in there, you know, from 941s, payroll reconciliations, all of it in the folder, and they've been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Ben, did you receive the DocuSign email from Bank of the West?
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I checked with Brenda and Laura, and they said we're in the queue. They can't tell us where we're in the queue, and hoping. So, I mean, I did the QuickBooks Online backup, just and reapplied with 2 different sources, hoping that maybe they'll get us through on one end versus the other.
Yeah. Do you have a relationship with any other bank locally?
I talked to Martina at the community or Crested Butte Bank just to get the process started. So she's got my documents, but whether they'll get in time being Tuesday, considering they released it yesterday again, and how deep they're in the queue. So I'm chumming the water, hoping.
Yeah. So Pam, I'll ask you before I jump out and say this, but is the foundation taking a position on whether people can submit multiple applications? Do you have an opinion on that?
No, I've not heard anything about that. So if I understand you correctly, Ben, you submitted an application with 2 different banks for the 2 different rounds?
Two different, I guess, potential lenders, just because it sounds like Bank of the West wasn't getting any traction, and up until just now, I haven't heard of anybody locally getting approved at Bank of the West, where I've heard Crested Butte Bank has funded quite a few, where I realized that maybe Bank of the West, because maybe it's a bigger organization, is getting bottlenecked in their processing. So I was like, we've got to do something else because we need PPP just like everybody else does, and it doesn't seem like Bank of the West is able to do it locally.
So are you thinking then you'll withdraw an application if you get your first?
Yeah, I'll notify them right away.
Yeah.
So the reason I asked is because technically you can't receive 2 PPP loans under the same EIN, obviously. And so I haven't heard of this happening, but theoretically there could be a fraud alert triggered if 2 applications go through the SBA system simultaneously, or one after the other after one's already been approved. I will tell you that after consulting our board, Rumble submitted more than 1 application, and that's I think how we got it. Is at the 11th hour we went to Crested Butte Bank in the first round of funding, and Martina was great. So my caveat is that I don't know that you won't get a fraud alert triggered if somehow both happen to go through, and that might create problems for you, but we hedged and submitted a second application with
Did you circle back to your first application?
I did. Okay. Yeah, I did, because and it was a little bit different because at that point we had an application with Bank of the West. That's the first one we went with, and they send you an email that has your number in it or whatever, and I replied to that right away and said, we submitted, it looks like it's going through, please withdraw our application. And then later I got the email asking about the DocuSign. If you want to keep going with your application, respond to this email or sign the DocuSign. So when that came through, I just disregarded it. So as far as I know, I'm not going to jail yet, but I do have it in writing that I asked for our application to be withdrawn. So I would advise you do that. But I know that Crested Butte Bank was still processing applications this morning, so it might not be a bad idea to reach out.
For what it's worth, Community Banks of Colorado did the PPP for the center, and it was improved within a week. It was very, very fast.
Good. And Shelley, you're with community banks as well, I believe, and you've gotten it through pretty well, right? I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so yeah, we're with community banks. We got approved and are working through them, you know, signing the docs to get the loan deposited into our bank account. It wasn't very smooth for us, but it's water under the bridge.
Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to say that community banks, we have an account there, but it's not our primary account. And they would not allow us to apply for the PPP loan through them unless we moved all of our money to them. So I was really disappointed about that. We're sitting in the queue with Wells Fargo right now and not quite sure what to do about that.
That's a policy of community banks under any circumstance. The Center for the Arts, we used to have all of our accounts at Crested Butte Bank, and then when we got a loan for the building through Community Banks of Colorado, they required that every cent the center had in its possession had to be moved to their bank. And so I've heard this many, many times. You're absolutely right.
So is there any other local banks that are small that are still doing applications if you don't have your money with them?
I don't know the answer to that because we had an account at Crested Butte Bank. It wasn't our main account. And they know that. They knew that our main account was at Bank of the West. But I don't know, Pam or Alicia or Jenny, if you've heard of another bank accepting applications if someone's not a depositor.
Actually, the Gunnison Bank told me that they wanted you to be a depositor in order to apply. That was just a preliminary conversation I had with Chad when this all first came out. But that's what was said to me all that time ago. Seems so long ago.
Yeah. You know, Michelle, what I would say is it doesn't hurt to pick up the phone and call and ask.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you've got nothing to lose, right? I mean, they can tell you no, but we're all used to hearing no. So.
Doesn't hurt to ask. It's really true.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's their right. It's their right to decide, but it may not hurt to ask. So, are there any other questions? All right. So the last thing I thought I would talk about is an idea I threw out to Mario and Lauren earlier today. So I thought I'd throw it out to this group. I don't know how many of you are on the Facebook group. I'm going to get this wrong. Hold on. Let me look it up on my computer.
Gunnison Valley Nonprofit Community Forum.
Thank you. Gunnison Valley Nonprofit Community Forum. It's a closed Facebook group that was started a number of years ago. I think by someone who was at Mountain Roots at that point.
Yep.
And Lauren from the Community Foundation is an administrator now for some time on that Facebook forum. I was telling Mario that I'm part of a couple of Facebook groups that are closed Facebook groups for nonprofits that are more kind of national. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed or found very useful, particularly during this pandemic, is being a part of those Facebook groups and seeing all the exchange of ideas and information and questions and kind of the crowdsourcing of information. So what I proposed to Mario that I thought I might ask the group is if there's an interest, you know, I would encourage all of us and all of our nonprofit friends in the Valley, if we're not on that forum, to be on that forum, and that we start using that as a way to support one another kind of in real time. That, you know, if you have a question about the 941, if you have a question about an HR policy, if you have a question about, you know, how you conduct a board meeting, if you have a question, you know, I don't know, right? It could be lots of different things, but that we all serve as a resource for one another in that way. And it can be a way in kind of more real time to get answers to questions that are on our minds and see how other people, you know, Shelley and I were talking about that today, that so many of us are kind of our own islands, and, you know, Pam and Lauren and Alicia and Mario are always great resources. And there's no reason, you know, Lauren's already in part of that, but is there a way we can kind of more crowdsource what we're doing and support what the Community Foundation is already doing in terms of leadership in the Valley and kind of pull ourselves together? So I just wanted to throw that out to the group. And Mario, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, or if I presented it the way you understood it when I presented it today, or.
Sure. When Kelly mentioned it to me, I jumped right on it, and I think I was on the phone with Lauren about minus 20 seconds after that. It was one of our dreams of how that forum might be able to be used, and it really didn't materialize for any number of reasons. For one, you know, the young woman from Mountain Roots who had full control of it left the valley, and we couldn't find her for a long time. But yes, you know, that we've been hoping that, and actually sort of encouraging you guys as nonprofits to get involved in some of the other business subgroups that the ICE Lab is kind of managing, you know, the retail and the trails and outfitters groups and so forth. In part because as nonprofits and for-profits, we need to work as a common sector. And also, I think sometimes the for-profits see us as the little sister with their hand out and don't always recognize the creative power and what you bring to it. So we want to keep you engaged in those business subgroups. At the same time, there's stuff that you as nonprofits need to know that doesn't really have relevance for the others. And finding an outlet for that, a place for that, seems like it would make sense. But this is, to me, as a bureaucrat at the Community Foundation, and I'd love to know what you guys think. Does this sound like something that would be worthwhile to you? Because if it isn't, we certainly don't want to create one more thing on your list.
I'm part of, Kelly and I talked about this earlier today, but like I'm part of some other ED Facebook groups, and they're really productive when you ask practical questions and stuff. So, you know, it seems to me like it would be, especially since it's already set up, you know, a good, I admit that I haven't really used the tool that way yet either, but I think it would be, given how productive the other ones are, I think it'd be great to have a valley-wide one.
Yeah, it's been used to date by the people who do use it as primarily a way to just post information. We have an event tonight, or come to our fundraiser. So this would be using something that already exists and kind of pushing it a little and making it all that it can be if you want it to be that.
This is Laura from Crested Butte Nordic. I do think that there's going to be a lot of questions in the coming months as we adjust to the new normal. I've been thinking a lot about budgeting and how do you budget, like, even if we're allowed to have events of 250 people, like how many people are actually going to want to come, and how do we budget for that, and how do we think about donations during this crisis, and how do we talk about donations if we're not on the front lines providing services. So I think there's a lot of issues that can arise that could potentially lead to really productive conversations in that kind of setting. It seems like I'm not part of the group now. So it seems like there's going to need to be like some people are going to have to change their habits a little bit to make it productive. And whether that's outreach from you guys and education from you guys, or just like plugging it in the news you can use every time as like the lead article, like, don't forget, if you've got questions, check in here. Because it seems like if that's not how it's been used historically, there's going to need to be a little like re-education or marketing of the group or something to get people to engage with it. Because that's when it sounds like it will be the most effective, when we can help each other figure out how you budget for events when you don't know how many people will come, or that kind of thing.
That's a great point. One thing that Lauren reminded me and asked me to suggest to you is there's two ways to join the group. One is to get invited by somebody who's already part of the group. So I know a number of the people on this call are. So aggressively invite your friends to join. That's one way. Or the other is to simply, go to the Facebook site and put in a request to join, and Lauren will approve you. She's not going to say, ooh, really, I don't like Tina's haircut. I'm just not going to do that. So she will. But please, if you're Facebook friends with other nonprofit people, please get them invited. And that's something that you can do right away. And then we can certainly hype it in the news you can use. I think this is also, Kelly and I were chatting, this is another great way to call on the expertise of some of the people on our STEP roster, maybe some of the people who aren't automatically in the nonprofit world, but who have got a great deal of wisdom about leadership or coping with ambiguity or other topics that I know are dear to our hearts right now, that we could get involved in a thread of something that is raised by you.
What is it called again, Mario?
The Gunnison, Alicia, you can help me out here. The Gunnison Valley
Nonprofit Community Forum, I believe.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yep.
Thanks.
And what I told Mario is, because I know a lot of the ISLAB subgroups are they're really working on plans for reopening and thinking about that. And I know some of us have jumped into those other groups to think about the practicalities of the health orders and how we can operate. But maybe what could happen is this forum that we've been in and kind of the every 2 weeks, at some point it could evolve to, you know, maybe there's enough of a critical mass of conversation and questions being posted to the Facebook page that it'll be clear that there's a topic that we really need to address. You know, it sounds, you know, budgeting might be one of them, or some of these things. And I'm imagining that when it comes time, you know, when it's the end of June and July and we're all preparing our loan forgiveness applications to the banks, that's probably worthy of another session then, and kind of some group work. And maybe we all need like martinis and just sort of commiserate at that point. But I could see how there might be an opportunity that, you know, if I'm watching it, Mario, you're watching it, Lauren's watching it, so, you know, it'll be clear if an issue generates enough interest, then we could get a group, you know, the foundation could maybe help get people together on a call like this, and we can kind of group think it or have someone talk about the relevant issues. And that can kind of drive what the agenda looks like for, you know, a group like this going forward. So that was just the idea I had today.
So I think it's worth trying. So I'd just love to suggest to each of you that tomorrow morning or before you go to bed tonight, you at least go to the group, and if you're not a member, ask Lauren to approve you, and in the next couple of days send out Facebook friend requests. Let's see what happens and try to be really intentional about getting into the habit of going there for a couple of weeks. As I say, I think one of the things that I feel is, you know, trying to make lemonade out of the lemon that we've got right now is that I feel like that with the business subgroups, we really can get involved in the big picture as an equal player, which sometimes, as I say, we're not seen as. But there are things that we need to talk about among ourselves. So we can simultaneously support one another as we're also leaving the silo of being seen as just those nonprofits.
Yeah.
So let's try it. And we'll keep mentioning it in the next few news you can use and see what happens.
Great. Thanks, Mario.
Well, thank you for starting the conversation.
Well, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, let's see. So at this point, our intent still is that on the next one of these, which would be the week after next, to talk about how we're thinking about the summer. You know, 250 things may have become either clearer or more murky in the next 2 weeks. But let's tentatively still think about doing that on May the 12th. I mentioned in this morning's news, you can use the Colorado Nonprofit Association has a session that's free on exactly that on May the 6th, which is sold out right now. And I've been lobbying to get them to offer it again. And I am waiting to hear, but it can't hurt for you guys to sign up and get on the mailing list, because at least you'll get the copy of the recording. And then we'll see where it all goes from there, I guess.
Great. Thank you. If anyone has any specific questions that I can help with, it's Kelly, Kelly @rmbl.org. Happy to help.
And just as with last time, excuse me, we're recording this, and it'll be posted on the Nonprofit Subgroup page. If you don't know it, it's COVID-19 Gunnison County.org. Is that right, Alicia? I'm looking at you because
it's covid19.gunnison.county.org.
Thank you. And then you go there and you'll see that there's the various subgroups, of which the nonprofits is the one on my screen, at least in the bottom right-hand corner. And that's where we're putting the notes and the recordings from these meetings. And Kelly had offered to send out some forms and worksheets, and we'll be posting those there as well. So
Absolutely.
stay
And
tuned.
Stan, I'll look into your question for you too about the EIDL.
And let us know what you learn about contributed versus earned revenue. If you do learn anything, I'm interested on that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm looking at it for another organization that I'm friendly with. All
So,
right.
Pam, besides wild applause for Kelly, thank you, Kelly.
Yeah,
Do you have anything to say to close us out? Give us a benediction as we hit the road?
Well, I just want to say to everybody, it's been an amazing time in the Valley, and it's been a super amazing time, and I use the word amazing not necessarily in the positive sense, for all of the nonprofits and for all of our businesses. And a thank you for hanging in there. A thank you for being here today and wanting to continue conversations. I think it says a lot about our nonprofits in the Valley when we can take time from our days to do this together. And the foundation has a phrase it uses with pretty fair regularity, that we are better together. And I think that we're proving that over and over this spring. So thank you for being there and being better together. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
For the heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.